Good afternoon. How many people have heard of Granted? Oh, good, not everybody. All right, so this is a new program, and so I have kind of some general information about Granted, but what I really want to do is talk to you about Granted and get questions and get discussion and so on, and that's true of folks online as well as here in the room. So this, as a new program for NSF, is really about enabling the rest of the work of NSF to happen and happen well. So before I get started, this is one slide I include in almost every one of my presentations. Right now is a great time to apply to NSF. And Jean, I do this in all my presentations. I hope you're proud of me. And so, you know, with CHIPS and Science appropriation, even though our FY24 dollars didn't quite come in, and I still don't think that they're in for sure, but they weren't as high as what we would like, it is still a fabulous time to submit to NSF. You saw earlier in the proposal preparation that we have this fabulous funding opportunity search engine, which I think the last time I looked, which might have been a day or so ago, it had 813 funding opportunities available to you. And that's a little too much in my personal opinion, but that still means we have a lot of availability, and it's a great time to submit proposals to NSF. So how many people are like working on a proposal right now? All right, awesome, fabulous. Well, hopefully you'll learn a few things at this conference, maybe in this session, and we're certainly all available here for questions. All right, to get started, I wanted to take a look at a few different audiences because I wasn't sure when I created these slides who I'd be talking to. So let's just say that this here is a research, a person who helps research happen at their institution. How many people in the room fit this? That maybe you're not a direct researcher, but you help make research happen. All right, excellent. And then there are the researchers themselves. I had to take stock photos, so my apologies if you're not a chemist, but how many people are researchers themselves? Okay, excellent. And how about students? How many students do we have in the room? Oh, thank you, awesome. And the teams of investigators, how many people are collaborators and partners on a lot of the work that they do? Or any of the work that they do? Okay, so with this talk, I'm speaking to all of these audiences, but there are different takeaways from this proposal and this program depending on who you are. So I'm gonna try to make some distinctions as we go, but generally speaking, I'm trying to make sure that every person on the slide in representing different audiences and so on understands what Granted is and how it plays a role in helping ensure that our nation is as competitive as we possibly can be. All right, so let's first take a big picture view. In FY22, nearly $100 billion was expended, not given away from us, but expended by colleges and universities for research and development. And when I say development, that's like innovation, research commercialization, and so on. That's a lot of money. That's a lot, and it keeps going up every year, even if an agency like NSF doesn't keep getting a higher budget, even though we'd like to. And our nation's global competitiveness is critical. It's critical for many, many reasons, but when we talk to Congress and we're trying to pitch our reasons for asking for more money, the nation's global competitiveness is absolutely essential. And even if an individual researcher or a student doesn't necessarily have that in mind, maybe as their broader impact, it is really everybody's broader impact, that we want to have a very competitive nation. The CHIPS and Science legislation, in case you didn't know, this was the legislation in FY22 that gave NSF plus a few other agencies its money for the year for FY23. But in that legislation, we got a new term, emerging research institution. How many people have heard of this term now? Okay, so the formal definition of emerging research institution is an institution that expends less than $50 million in federal research expenditures in any particular year. And by institution, I mean an institution of higher ed with either an undergrad or grad program. So $50 million in federal research expenditures, 50 million or less. That's actually thousands of colleges and universities in the United States. And according to FY22 expenditure data, only 160 institutions in the US were not ERIs. So there's a lot of ERIs. And NSF, by Chips and Science said, you need to pay attention to ERIs. And we were already paying attention to ERIs, but we really are paying attention to ERIs now. So how many people think they're at an ERI? Or they know, you think or know? Okay, great. We also know that the pandemic really put a stress and strain on institutions of higher ed in so many ways. But just for this talk, and because I'm limited in time, I'm only going to talk about this from the research perspective. We know that the workforce that is part of helping make research happen, they were tired in the pandemic. How many people feel this as I'm saying these words? They burned out, they took other jobs, they were very effective remotely, and then when the pandemic was easing, they were asked to come back in the office, and they said, well, wait a minute, I was really good remotely. Why do I have to come back? I'm going to quit this job and find a remote job. So many, many, many changes have happened to the backbone of research. And this is a little bit alarming because we rely on this backbone for research to happen. And without it, that $98 billion is just going to crumble, or it's going to sit not expended, or it's going to get clogged up somewhere and maybe given back to an agency like NSF, who then has to give it back to Treasury. It just confuses everything. So we don't want that. When we give our money, we want people to expend it. And we also know that there's varying awareness of this backbone, this what we call actually the research enterprise, but the backbone staff and the functions that they have at their institutions. I'll give a quote from a colleague at a large institution who said, it never occurred to me that people didn't have access to the same resources that I have at my institution. And that person knew one person that was their primary resource that helped them submit proposals, pretty much. So we know that people differ in how they understand the research enterprise. So for these reasons and many more, we have created a new program. And I'm going to, before I get to the meat and potatoes of Granted, let me talk about a few more challenges that we recognize. So we know that the assistance and available support for research and sponsored activity is not equitably experienced. Maybe you're in a well-resourced institution, so an R1 institution, and you're in a college that doesn't have anybody to help submit proposals. Or maybe you're in a collaboration with another university and they have all sorts of help and you have none. Or you had a tremendous person who helped you for many, many years and they retired and they haven't been replaced yet. How many people see these kinds of issues? Okay, great. So I know I'm not just making this up. We also know that a lot of people in these positions find these positions accidentally, like their very first position as a research administrator, a pre-award specialist, a post-award administrator. They totally find these accidentally. They have no idea that these jobs existed when they were an undergrad or maybe just out of high school, because it doesn't really matter some of the backgrounds to get into these jobs. And then we know that the attrition or the retention of these staff is really, really difficult, especially if you live in a part of the country that maybe is really hard to attract new talent in these different kinds of jobs. So there's a lot of churn. The remote work options I already kind of mentioned. Training is available, but not equitably accessible. So a lot of training is available in professional societies who have big conferences that are in urban environments that might be a great distance for some people to travel. Maybe they have limited virtual options for training and so on. So that it's just not, again, equitably accessible. And there's also some big systemic issues all across research and education that are real problems for all universities and not just one institution in particular. So for example, At an R2 institution that has never hired a postdoc before, the HR system might not be set up to hire a postdoc. How many people know this? I see a lot of nodding heads. I had this experience at an R2 institution. Or maybe you're trying to hire in a cohort of individuals to help build out a research center, but the HR jobs and titles and salaries and stuff just aren't in place. And so it's very difficult to get this set up. Or it might be that there are some financial practices or lack thereof in the budget system at the university. There aren't cost centers, or there aren't ways to not commingle the external dollars with the internal dollars or the tuition dollars. And this gets into everybody gets in trouble in an audit in that regard. So there's all sorts of these kinds of issues. And then I learned about an issue last fall that I wasn't really aware of that really causes me some heartburn, is that students who are on financial aid, in order for them to become a paid research assistant, that threatens their financial aid base. How many people know this one? Now, there are some workarounds in all of these cases, but wouldn't it be better if we just got rid of the systemic issues in totality? So we're aware of these and several other issues, but we keep this in mind because, again, no one institution can solve these problems. And then there's also faculty workload issues. And these vary in all sorts of different ways, but sometimes it will make someone say, well, we don't do research because the mission of our institution is teaching. But a lot of institutions want to give experience to students that are consistent with research experiences and so on. So there's all sorts of things in this space that are challenges. And I think that also pertains to that one. So, granted, so all those reasons and a few more is why we created this new program. Growing research access for nationally transformative equity and diversity. How's that for an acronym? We worked really hard on that one. But this quote here that comes from the funding opportunity for granted said a strong national research enterprise relies on more than just funding the research itself. And we need that backbone for all the rest of it to happen. So that's why we have Granted, and Granted is kind of a special program at NSF, and we've crafted it in a very specific way. This wheel, we call it the Granted wheel, uses language to describe a number of different positions, functions, segments of institutions and organizations where we're trying to focus our efforts. And so we'll get into some of these, but I'm going to put down or lay out some terms here. All these slides are in the app already, so you get this in case you don't want to take pictures or take notes. But research development, how many people know what research development is? Okay, good, few hands. So these folks, I like to call them the pre-award specialists. And they are very much thinking long-term, strategically. They're trying to put a lot of pieces together. They're trying to help a lot of people. They might help form teams and collaborations. They're just doing a lot of dot connecting. They may help proposal by proposal, but usually not in a logistics way. It might be much more about working to help ideas come together. Research administration, pre and post award. These are individuals that fill in a research admin, research service, sponsored programs office, and so on. A lot of times people know that there are individuals at institutions and organizations in these roles, but sometimes if you're brand new and you have no idea that there's somebody who can help, just knowing and finding out that your university has somebody to help might be new to you as a researcher. We've talked a lot about broader impacts already, so broader impacts professionals. That's an area of investment for a lot of institutions. They hire people to help with broader impacts. Tech transfer and research commercialization. Some institutions have dedicated staff for this and some don't. Corporate relations and public-private partnerships, that might be in your development office or it might be in your research office or both. Or never, neither. Maybe you won't have anybody that represents this. Research integrity, compliance, and security. These are all areas that have varying kinds of capacities at different institutions. Public access research and impacts research, research policy, infrastructure support for student research. So the list kind of goes on, and we have some areas that aren't on the Granted wheel that we need to update the wheel. It's been a little while, so we'll hopefully do that here soon. And then also research leadership, which can be the chief research officer all the way down to a PI who's trying to become more of a research leader for a lab or a center or something like that. So we have a funding opportunity for Granted. It's not just talking about awareness or saying, hey, these roles are important or these functions are important or people should find these jobs and get training and so on. But it is about really thinking about the nation's research enterprise and how we're going to make sure that this backbone is equitable, accessible, and not as fragile as it seems to be right now. So in this program description, there's the link. I always find it by just Googling NSF Granted, because luckily the acronym is one that pops up pretty easily. So we're hoping that the ideas that are submitted to Granted over time will increase access to resources, catalyze this national transformation of the research enterprise, and address systemic issues. So not every project is nationally transformative, but we like to say to people who interact with us and talk with us in our webinars and our office hours and so on, that over time and across projects, we will reach that national transformation. But project by project, we want to see some models. We want to see some people come up with some great ideas or transition a great idea into a scalable idea. We want to see more things coming together and shared across the nation so that we can build that infrastructure that we want to see all across the nation. We want ideas and approaches that can be translated into new and different contexts, institutions, jurisdictions, regions, whatever. And we're looking to do human capital investments in addition to research on the research enterprise, training for an intentional workforce, and evaluating effective practices. So all of these things, plus again more, we're very, very flexible in Granted. The only thing we don't do pretty much is train or pay for grad students or undergraduates in disciplinary areas. We don't do none of our funding goes to that. And we don't fund disciplinary research because the rest of NSF does that. This is, again, a special program. So a few other things about this, this program description. It's not a limited submission. So as soon as we started this program, that was the first question we had. Is this a limited submission? No. Why? Because I don't like limited submissions, and I don't think it needs to be, because we're trying to create an accessible program. There's no deadline, because there's no deadline. Why do we need a deadline? Great ideas can come in at any time, and the door is always open. And I want to practice no deadline. I want to understand what no deadline means outside of NSF as well as inside of NSF. And after a year, we have really learned a lot from this. There's no budget cap or budget floor. Now, there is kind of a cap, because in the first year, we were allocated nearly $50 million. So we weren't going to give $50 million away in one project. That's never going to happen. But, so we're limited by our appropriation or our allocation. I don't know what it is for FY24 right now, so I can't really say. But generally speaking, we've given small awards, small meaning around $100,000 or a little less than that, all the way up to nearly $10 million, I think is our largest award so far. Oh no, $14 million is our largest award so far. So we do stick with the sort of 5-year term of a project, and we don't restrict or discourage any type of institution or nonprofit organization from participating. We use the PAPG's eligibility. And there's a lot of caveats to that eligibility section of the PAPG. So if you are an organization, not an institution of higher ed, you're from a company, an FFRDC, something like that, read the PAPG and see what it says there. And then again, we don't fund disciplinary research, graduate student training, faculty training, or the offering of grant writing workshops. Now, if you want to hire someone at your institution to develop and scale pre-award services, and that person can offer grant writing workshops, that's totally fine. But we're not going to pay for a grant writing workshop. And if we had tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of more money, maybe we wouldn't have any restrictions, but we probably still would have a few, I'm sure. So at first, and this is kind of a misconception about Granted, Granted has funded convenings, and which means conferences, workshops, and other get-togethers. And we started with that for the Granted program because we only had a little bit of money at first before we got the CHIPS and Science allocation. So we had like $2 million or so. And so with that, we funded convenings initially. How many people have participated or are a PI or co-PI on a Granted convening? Ooh, one person. Oh, a couple people. Okay, fabulous. Thank you. And so these convenings are still taking place. Many of them have happened last year and in the spring, but still more coming in the summer and the fall. You can see the map there of where institutions and organizations came out of states or collaborated with other states. And then the graph on the right there is the percentage of awards made to institutions in EPSCoR versus non-EPSCoR states. And as I said before, NSF has this obligation to make sure that 20% of its obligations goes to EPSCoR jurisdictions by 2029. So tracking EPSCoR submissions is really important all across the foundation. So in the Granted program as well, we are very interested. And if we think of 20% of awards or obligations going to EPSCoR jurisdictions. Here we have 28% of Granted awards going to EPSCoR jurisdictions. So we're well on our way, not money-wise, but just the number of awards. So here's a few convening projects, and these all happen to come from EPSCoR jurisdictions because I reused a slide from an EPSCoR presentation. But these are just a few titles and descriptions of the convenings that have taken place in various places. And the numbers listed there are award numbers in case you want to go look them up and see the project summary for each one. We are absolutely still taking submissions that are around conferences and workshops for Granted. We would love to fund more of them. We have to get proposals to award things. So please, if you have a conference or workshop idea, consider submitting it to Granted. So again, about $2.5 million went to the 25 conferences and workshops initially, and then we've had these other awards come in. So $14 million went to a consortium of HBCUs in Atlanta, Georgia, so that they could work together on research administration functions. So this is something that we are very interested in because we want to know how could institutions collaborate in sponsored programs and figure out how we might scale that across states, in regions, and other kinds of structures. Because oftentimes institutions, you'll have a pre-award specialist from one institution talk to another pre-award specialist in another institution. That already happens, we get that. But how could these offices work together to support one another, to share practices, training, maybe even staff? So we're interested, it's an experiment. We want to find these things out. We funded about $9 million to Emory University. Yes, it's in Georgia. Yes, we are funding things outside of Georgia. It just so happens that folks in Georgia, they've got some ideas and they were ready to go. But the one that actually went to Emory, the second one there, is affiliated with the National Organization of Research Development Professionals, who had a pilot study or a pilot program to work with HBCUs and minority serving institutions to bring research development to those organizations. And so in doing that with a pilot study, they were able to come in and say, look, we've already done this really well. Now we want to scale it. And they've been doing really great to scale it very quickly. $8.5 million to an EPSCoR jurisdiction to provide holistic support for research grant administration to HBCUs and emerging research institutions. This is actually this award went to a nonprofit, and it was a new performer for NSF. They had never gotten funding from NSF. So now they have NSF funding, a lot of it, from Granted to build this infrastructure in a place that, not that Kentucky doesn't have any funding whatsoever to its institutions, but this was a gap area. And this organization saw the gap and said we could fill this. So we funded them to figure out how to fill it. $3.5 million is going to Iowa State for regional workforce development in an internship model. Let's see, oh no, wait. Okay, one of these, sorry, I have to, oh yeah, okay. So the 3.7 is to Iowa State, who's building up a program to bring more talent into the research enterprise support and service functions. Because in Iowa, no offense to anyone in Iowa, it's hard to recruit people into the middle of the US. I have felt that before myself, being in Indiana for a while. So this is something where they want to grow their own, and they want to create a model that could transition to any context anywhere. So that's the kind of national transformation that we're looking for. Around $2 million to support research capacity building in HSIs. That went to HAKU. So that's another professional society. So we again are taking proposals from all sorts of places. And then just over $1.5 million to expand research support within primarily undergraduate institutions. And this one happens to be an institution on the West Coast and an institution on the East Coast coming together and working together and finding ways to collaborate. Any questions? Did any of these surprise anyone? Are you pleased to see this kind of range of funding? I'm very pleased, quite frankly. The research enterprise ones? Yep. Yeah. So here's a little bit of data, and I'm sharing this. This is about the conference proposals versus the non-conference proposals, just because, again, we did so many conference proposals at the beginning of Granted. But you can see, obviously, the size of the lower graph there, the amount awarded, or let's see, percent granted funded awards by award type. So we have far more non-conference awards awarded. Let's see. I'm not sure. I'll have to fix that graph when I clean up I'm not sure what that lower graph is telling us. But the awards by type for conference awards and non-conference awards on the right there, and then the proposals coming in. So proposals, this is again a challenge. I said at the beginning of this talk, and now is a great time to submit a proposal to NSF. We definitely want proposals to the Granted program. I was at an EPSCoR PI meeting the other day, and I just met another person from Wichita State. I don't know if you're still in here, but a faculty member from Wichita State walked up to me and he said, I didn't know about this program, and I work with our sponsored programs office all the time, and they need more people. Can I help them get more people? And I said, absolutely you can. He says, is it okay that I'm a faculty member? Can I be the PI of this proposal? And I said, yes, you can. I think you'd have to explain why you're the right faculty member for this proposal, but you can absolutely submit on behalf or in collaboration with your sponsored programs office and talk about the plans that they would have, you would have, and so on. But it's also the case that we allow for PIs to come from all sorts of different types of positions. So you could be a person in sponsored programs and submit a proposal to Granted. You don't have to be a PhD. You don't have to have a list of publications. You don't have to have a bio sketch that looks like every faculty member you help. This is an open program for building the national research enterprise. Help us see your expertise in the work that you do and write the proposals so that we can see clearly that you're the right team, the right institution, the right approach to take for whatever it is that you're proposing, much like I said earlier in the panel. Okay, a little bit more data about our ERIs versus non-ERIs. And what I want to just summarize here is we take proposals and make awards to all types of institutions. And a lot of people try to ask us, well, like what's more competitive? Would it be more competitive if an ERI submitted this versus an R1 or whatever? There's no gamemanship for this. This is about great projects and great proposals that describe great projects. And we give you a lot of opportunity to talk with us to kind of talk about those ideas. And I hope that you will find an opportunity to join us in a webinar or in office hours or even at this meeting. I'm happy to answer questions and talk about ideas. But it's generally the case that there's no pattern. Don't look for any patterns. Don't look for, let's do it this way because this will be more competitive versus another thing. The folks who run Granted, and I'm just the person who helped start the program, I don't make the decisions. But the program is set up this way so that it's a big, broad, open door. And I would really be disappointed if we had such a clear pattern that people would start coming in a little side door that only looked like this. Okay, so we've created this program to show what access looks like and how we can do access in the right way. And if you feel like it's not accessible, I want to hear from you. All right, what are some potential ideas for granted? Well, again, we want to strengthen the nation's research enterprise because that $98 billion and rising, we want to make sure that it doesn't go nowhere. And I see a hand in the back, Sam.
Hello. Yes, you mentioned large awards, the larger ones. Did most of the large awards start out as planning grants?
No. Planning grants are allowed for NSF. Well, for NSF, yes, that's true, but for granted as well. So if you really are just trying to figure out the approach you need to take, maybe you need to hire a consultant or gather some data or figure out the approach that you want to take for a planning grant would be a great approach to granted. But we don't require them because again, we didn't want to put in a ton of requirements and hoops and other kinds of things. So we would really strongly suggest that you talk to us about your idea. And in a planning grant, you do have to submit a concept paper. That's part of the rules in the PAPG. So that would be one way in which to get to us early before you spend time writing a planning proposal or deciding to go for just a regular proposal. Any other questions?
No, that's it. The others I typed in the answer.
Oh, okay. So we want to see some gains within primarily undergraduate institutions, emerging research institutions, minority serving institutions. That's a goal, but that's not a limitation and it's not a requirement. So you saw earlier on that I mentioned Emory is one of our first awards. They're not a PUI, they're an R1. They're not an ERI, they're an R1. So it's something, and I want to make this clear, all types of institutions and organizations and any group that's eligible to receive funding from NSF can participate in granted. We are looking to support the nation's research enterprise, and we know a whole lot of people and organizations need to be a part of that. So we're not putting out those limitations to say, no, you can't apply. The only limitation is the PAPG. So again, it's a goal to see gains here because they are at a deficit already in terms of, again, they lost a lot of staff or they didn't have the staff to begin with, or maybe they're moving from an R2 to an R1 with the new Carnegie classifications in about a year. So there are all sorts of things that are changing in and around us, and we want to be open for that. The national transformation of the research enterprise is the broader impact. And we say that because that makes it easy for everybody, that you can see that, okay, this is what we're all going for. Your project may not be the national transformation yet, but it could get us on the path to getting there. And that's what we want to see. How do you articulate that? So workforce development for all those functions and jobs and areas and so on, that is definitely an idea for granted. Helping more people find these jobs, get skilled for these jobs, want to take these jobs, want to grow these jobs. This is a big piece because again, most of the time, and I'm going to ask for hands in just a second, most people in these jobs have found them accidentally. How many people is this true for you? Yep, it's true for me too. So I think that this is something we want to make intentional. The hiring of these folks. So if we're going to make a pathway, we got to have jobs. And we've been working with COOP HR, the Colleges and Universities Professional Association for Human Resources, to make sure that the position titles, descriptions, salaries, and so on are part of their big data sets for HR departments at colleges and universities. Working with them, we figured out that they have no research development titles and position descriptions. So we put COOP HR and NORDIP together so that they could figure out how to close that gap. That's a systemic issue, and that's how we've tried to address it. Here's a whole bunch of other ideas. Research on the research enterprise, evaluating existing programs and scaling them, Institutional capacity for broader impacts development. We hear a whole lot of people who want this kind of thing. Well, all right, ARIS already has a program to help people get ready and start to get going. But if you wanted to expand it and you had a really terrific start with an ARIS grant, well, maybe it might be suitable for granted as well to scale it up, bring more institutions in, share resources, whatever it happens to be. There are so many ideas. I can't list them all, but please, please, please come to us and chat with us about those ideas. So how do you chat with us? Well, you can join the Granted mailing list, and this is the Granted website. All of these things are on the Granted website. So we have a link for joining the mailing list. We have office hours every Wednesdays with very, very few exceptions. We've missed a few Wednesdays here and there, but 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern time. You can email us at granted@nsf.gov, myself and 2 program officers, soon to be 4 program officers. We're going to bring 2 new rotational program officers on board, hopefully this summer. And so that'll expand our capacity. But we want you to reach out to us and connect with us. We're happy to take meetings to talk about ideas. We usually give feedback like, yes, this is granted aligned. No, it's not granted aligned, so on and so forth. So it just kind of depends on what you're ready to share. I see a question.
Yes. Do you ever foresee granted being extended to small business or those programs being eligible for this?
So SBIR STTR is eligible for, that's how companies are eligible for funding. Okay. And so again, the PAPG, the way it's worded, I think it would be really, you'd have to really navigate that specifically to see if they could come in for granted. We have had one organization, one company reach out to us, and we asked them to go talk to SBIR to see if there's an opportunity for SBIR and granted to work together. Okay. So that might be another path.
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so I think this is actually my last slide. So let me see. Yep. Okay, so let me go back to that. Questions, comments? Come up to the mic, please. I know it's kind of hard to work your way through there.
I hope this microphone works. So. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good. Okay, awesome. My name is Nadia. I am a research administrator at the departmental level. Hearing all this is music to me. I have been receiving granted emails, but did not get a chance to look into so much detail. So a few questions here. Can you talk about that? Who could lead these proposals? Do they have to be the principal investigators who are PhD holders only, or do you expect the research administration leaders to lead these kind of proposals?
So we have no restrictions.
Okay.
We have found that some institutions will restrict their staff from serving as a PI. I think that's an institutional barrier. Mm-hmm. That should be solved by the institution, and we have made granted so accessible so as to say to the institution, you're leaving money on the table because you won't let me be a PI. So for those institutions that have that challenge, I'm very interested in helping you challenge your institution in this way. But we don't have a barrier set up there. So it doesn't matter if you're a research administrator, a vice president for research, a faculty member. It's the idea and who is best suited to lead it.
Okay, thank you so much. Second question, I think you mentioned this is relatively a very new program, probably in fiscal year 2022. That's where it started from. Am I correct on that?
Could you lean a little closer to the mic?
Sure.
Yeah.
Did you say that this program actually started in year 2022 and fiscal year 2022 was the first time it was awarded?
So FY23 was officially when it started.
Okay.
CHIPS and Science was approved in August of 22. So technically the fiscal year 22, we heard the news, and then we had to work to get the appropriation set up and all that stuff. So it's official start in FY23.
The reason I ask this question is because all those universities or awardees who have received funds to do those grants projects, when do you think that you'll be ready to measure the success of those projects?
So we're already looking, for some of them, the success was getting people around the table to talk about a certain issue. And will they submit another granted proposal? They don't have to. but it might have been enough for people to come around the table and say, I didn't realize so many people had this same issue. Let's work on it together. And whether you need resources for it or not, that's up to them. Conferences and convenings aren't seed projects necessarily. They're opportunities to bring people together. So the impact there, I think, is articulating topics, getting more people, new voices to the table, helping people see that they are allowed in and they belong. So that's a big piece of this too. And again, in the kind of ERI, given that that's new language for us and for others, that enabling people to see that we see that not every institution is well-resourced to do this work. How can we play a role in helping people make improvements there? That's really, I want people to hear that loud and clear, because a whole lot of the rest of NSF is relying on this. And if we can't equip institutions that want to find success other places of NSF, then we're not working in the right way.
That would be great, actually, that if you could share the results and the successful projects as of now, maybe on the website. So all of us who are not able to yet apply for this program, maybe can take a look at it and get benefit out of it.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay, other series of questions. When you were talking about, these are the problems that you are trying to solve, and I was checking mark, yes. Believe me, those are the hiring, retention of the research administration workforce. When you mentioned about the workforce development, do you think micro-credentials or offering those kind of micro-credential courses would be helpful in doing those workforce development through an institution?
Sure. So, some of the challenges with micro-credentials right now is the accessibility of them. So do you have to pay for them? Do you have to belong to a certain professional society to get credits to get advanced towards a credential and so on? So those are some of the issues that I would challenge. If someone came in with a proposal and they were going to charge a whole lot of money and they were going to do this, that, and whatever, I would challenge them to how can you make this more accessible, more broadly accessible?
Actually, that's leads to my next question about the budget request, maybe. Is it something that we can budget into this program that,
Sure.
we are, okay.
Yep.
Good to know. Do I have another question? If I remember, I'll definitely
Okay, you can
reach out.
stand there and wait, and we'll take another question
Absolutely.
here. And
Last thing.
Okay.
I didn't catch your name, if you don't mind sharing it again.
you didn't hear my name like the
I
5
probably
times.
tried. I'm so sorry about that. It is, all right, thank you.
It's Alicia Needler.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Quick question. If we plan to, kind of having the idea integrate the K to 12 or community colleges to research of the faculty at the 4-year, for example, institution, then planning to have kind of like a workshop or conferences, then can we apply for this program or no? It will be in the category of the discovery, program that we have by NSF.
So community colleges, absolutely. K through 12, I think it would really depend on what is it that they're trying to leverage by doing this. If they, for example, are trying to figure out how to be an effective STEM partner with other organizations in their locale or whatever, and that they somehow need infrastructure to do that, I think it would really depend on the details of how to do that. We're not saying no to K through 12, in a sense, but Jean's going to tell me what my limitations are in this regard. But the partnerships, absolutely, they can be part of partnerships and other kinds of things.
And one more question. I was a part of proposal that we applied for having like a STEM workshop. And one of the feedback that we received from reviewer was that what are your justification in terms of having a sustainable effect or sustainable assessment? Then how we can clarify to do like a 1-year or 2-year, for example, workshop that is the short time that happens, then having enough justification as a sustainable impact for the future to have those individuals integrated in a STEM, a STEM area, because we have like a pre-survey and post-survey, but then how we can address having a sustainable assessment if even the workshop are designed for a short amount of the time. Thank you.
So if you don't mind, I'd like to answer that offline, because that seems a little bit more specific to that program. So, okay, Jean.
Just to bit of a clarification.
Thank you.
So for state and locals, which is what K through 12 would be considered, it's got to be permitted by the specific funding opportunity.
Okay.
And so it's not that we couldn't do it in the future, but we'd have to do something and put it in.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So I'm going to go over here and then over
I
here.
think online's hand was up.
Oh, online. Thank you. Sam.
My hand was up. Okay, now I lost my question. Okay, yeah, well, one question is, are granted awards renewable? Can they renew them?
Not in an official way.
Exactly. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, same procedure, as Jean said, same procedures would apply.
Okay. And are collaborative granted proposals generally more competitive than those from single institutions?
There's no game in town for this. There's not a competitive advantage or anything. It depends on the project.
Thank you.
So if you want it to be more competitive because it's going to work better for you, then you're going to write like that and it's going to come across that way.
Yes. And is there a mailing list that one can be added to?
Yes, join the granted mailing list. It's actually, there's a link to get to it on the granted website. And I hope online can still see my slide here. If you just go to that link for the granted website, you'll find the mailing list.
Okay, I'll turn it back over to in person.
Okay, so do we want to go over here first?
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so glad I came to this because it really is put into perspective what Granted is all about, because there's so many different things that are going on right now. I'm really confused. I'm with a PUI, and so seeing that one of your goals is to increase PUI participation, and I just wonder if NSF has any ability to make connections among PUIs who might want to, this is just a question you can think about, who want to participate. I know there are different listservs and NORDAP and CLASP and things like that have gotten into that. So if there's other ways, maybe. And the other question that I had is, I wonder if when you're working with Coupa, are there studies out there that show where research professionals, what the degrees are that we have? I mean, does Coupa have that data?
Yeah, they do.
They do,
Yeah.
okay. So I don't think my institution could get that from Coupa.
Are they a Coupa member?
Well, I think so. I mean, I don't, yeah, maybe.
So some data, some reports are on Coupa's website, are publicly available. You don't have to be a member. But, you could reach out to Coupa, even if you're not a member institution. I don't know all their rules and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't know either.
But if you had a particular need, and you could refer to Granted, because again, we've presented with the Coupa staff around the opportunity space here, which is how we link them up with NORDAP and everything. So they know about Granted for sure.
Yeah, so I had a question. I have a question now from the audience. What is Coupa? So can you clarify what Coupa is for everyone?
So Colleges and University Professional Association for Human Resources. So Coupa, it's like another professional society, but they have paid staff who study universities, and universities make use of their materials to then help with their hiring, with the position titles, the position descriptions, the salary. Different regions of the US have higher salaries for this research administrator versus that research administrator and so on. So they just have tons of data, and then they have HR professionals. This is the professional society for them, and they can come together and so on. So when I was at an R2 institution, we did not have access, well, we had access to Coupa HR, but this is where I first started to realize that there weren't research titles where I needed research titles. And I knew there were research titles because I was in an R1 before that. And I know they have these, but my institution as an R2 just didn't know about this. They didn't have access to it. So this is something that I kind of came in with and said, we've got to figure this thing out. Turns out it's figure-outable. If that's a word. Okay, right here.
So I don't have a question, but I wanted to share an experience with a granted convening. I am with the University of Arizona, and Arizona State University, Northern Arizona University, and the University of Arizona for the past couple of years have put on a Tri-University Research Administration Conference. Last year, we applied for and were granted a granted award for this conference. And what they used that for was to expand the capabilities of the conference, because it's 3 institutions kind of putting in whatever resources we could. So funding like websites and communications and that type of things, networking. And then everybody was able to attend for free. So we had people who might not have otherwise been able to attend, be able to go to a conference for workforce development. It was a wonderful opportunity. I can't wait for them to send you the findings and everything else. They did a fantastic job of it. Did not write it, just participated in it. But just as an example of one of the things that Granted has done is that type of thing. It's knowledge sharing and increasing the accessibility for it.
And did you include any tribal universities or tribes in that?
Oh yeah, so Dinek College in Arizona was also part of that. They were part of the panels, and I sometimes forget them because we have them in so many things. We are doing CRA study section, and Dinek has taken part in that. They're in everything. University of Arizona actually has a MOU, and we're working with them to help build up their infrastructure and research capacity.
Excellent. Thank you. Are there any other online ones?
Yes, I can wait until after this one if you like.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead with your question.
Go ahead.
please.
All right, my question is quick. I'm curious to know what the criteria is for reviewers on this. What do the reviewers look like? Who can throw their hat in the ring?
So I think I said this earlier, that when we opened up our little form, this was the program I was mentioning on the panel earlier, when we opened up our granted reviewer volunteer form, we got like 500 people like right away. So we have a lot of people who have reviewed, but that doesn't mean that we don't need more, because we take people's CVs, and we also in the form you can check a box like, oh, I'm a broader impacts professional, or I'm a tech transfer person. And so then we, depending on the proposals that come in, we're able to utilize that information to construct our panels. The other thing we didn't really talk about on the review side of things is NSF often invites a lot of reviewers who have to say no to a review experience. Might not be the right time for them. It might be that they want to come and travel for the panel and it's a virtual panel and they don't want to do that, or vice versa. Or that, we do pay reviewers a little bit, the ones who sit on panels, a micro amount. And so maybe that's not really something that the person can handle. So even though we have 500 plus people in a data set, that doesn't mean that even if we invite 10 people to sit on a panel, all 10 will say yes. So please do volunteer and tell us more about yourself. We don't have any restrictions. I mean, if you came in and you were, I don't want to say no one's allowed or any particular thing, but if you came in and you said, oh, I'm the vice president of this tribal college and I have expertise in all of these things except for no expertise in the research enterprise, then that probably won't be high on our list. But we have people from all parts of the wheel so far. Yep. Online.
Okay. How do you see institutions sustaining new research enterprise staff after a grant ends? Is there a need to address sustainability in the proposal?
Absolutely. Yes. And in fact, if you come to a granted office hour or watch webinars, we have an older webinar online, and we're about to post a newer set of videos soon. But sustainability absolutely needs to be part of a proposal that comes in for granted. And so, for example, if you were putting in, let's say, a cluster hire or a cohort hire of grants administration staff, you want to hire 3 people, pre-award, post-award, and a contract negotiator all at the same time because you have no one. Or you have one person who does everything and you want to expand your staff because there's been huge faculty hiring at your institution and that one person can't keep up. So you come in with this cohort hire idea and you're using a whole lot of evidence out in the literature about faculty cohorts, and you're translating it into a staff cohort. So you're using evidence and you're saying, this is a great idea because it works over here, and we're going to translate it over here, and we're going to make sure we have a champion and a mentor for our cohort. It's all going to work great. And then the the goal is that this cohort of people are going to help with an increase in proposals, an increase in managing awards, and an increase in new contract negotiations. And by year 5, we'll hire them in years 1 and 2. And by year 5, our sustainability plan is that the university will take over their salaries by year 5. And it could be that that's just never going to happen. And so then perhaps in the proposal they say, well, the university will probably take over 50% of the salary of these individuals by year 5. And, maybe that comes to us and then we're concerned and reviewers are concerned and we're like, oh no, what's going to happen? So these are things that I think part of the granted experience right now is learning. We're trying to learn what's possible and how to set expectations around what's possible. It is really difficult to think about what's in the future for sustainability. But what we would hate for something to happen is an investment in significant staff only for the university or the institution or organization to have never decided that they were ever going to sustain those. That's definitely not competitive. But if we could have discussions with institutions to try to figure out what a plan might be for sustainability, or, and here's my most awesome idea that I would love for somebody to submit, how do we research sustainability about research? Because we ask for sustainability plans in all types of projects, not just granted projects. So who's creating the literature on what it takes for things to be sustainable? And if you did that in a research enterprise context, it wouldn't have to be around pre and post award or tech transfer, but just broadly the research enterprise. How do we think about sustainability in the research enterprise? And here's my 3-year research project or something. Send it to Granted. I'd love to see that. I see 2 people nodding their heads, so I expect 2 proposals on this idea. Other questions? No? Okay, we're 36 seconds according to my little stopwatch. Thank you all. I really appreciate your time, your curiosity, your attention, your interest, and I'm here for questions. I'm here the whole time for the whole grants conference, and I'm also talking about OIA tomorrow. So thank you all.
Thank you so much, Alicia.